I guess we're live now. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is CJ the Skeptic here. I ran into something on YouTube the other day. Now, I've heard this before from Gman. It's his argument on prayer and how having answered prayer equals proof that God exists. Now, I actually used to subscribe to this line of thinking, and remarkably, within the same degree that Gman has, and well, does at least. This is one of his more notorious arguments, I should say. This has been debunked multiple times, but as something new for my channel, I think I should do it myself. I think it would be most beneficial for my channel, at least. So I got some notes here. I took notes on his video. Let's see here. 1 second. We'll go to screen share real quick. So let's talk about his video. So his video here has 1,084 views, which is pretty good for his channel, I think, with 83 dislikes, including myself. Sorry, G-Man, I can't help myself when it comes to an argument like this. And 6 likes. I bet that one of those 6 likes comes from Darwin's Deity, and another one from Matt Slick, and another one from Brett Keane. Let's go back to what we were seeing here. Myself. Now, I've taken notes in this video. I watched the whole thing all the way to the end, and I don't think I need to watch the end, but I watched it anyways. So this is so G-Man can say like, "Oh, you didn't watch my whole video." No, I watched your whole video. All right. So one of the things that G-Man said in this video is that prayer is intimacy with God. Prayer is where you seek out His will. Prayer is where you can also worship God as well. And it's also a spot for inquiry with God. You can inquire things about God, about His will, about His plan for you, about what His opinion is anyways. His opinion is on the specifics of whatever situation you're in. No matter how dire it is, of course. I mean, I don't think God has any limits necessarily on what is valid and what's not as far as an issue when it comes to prayer. But let's see here. G-Man claims at around 2 minutes in the video that Christians know when God hears and answers their prayers. And first off, we have to talk about knowledge. I think we need to define knowledge. And for the purpose of this conversation, knowledge is defined as that which can be verified or determined as accurate. Knowledge is something that we gain from discourse and inquiry and other means of acquiring knowledge. And that's the definition of knowledge for this particular discussion we're having right now. Something that can be verified. Now, some people will say that I'm conflating with fact, but at the same time, a fact is true because a fact can be verified. That knowledge can be verified because there are facts to prove that that knowledge is valuable and correct. So I'm kind of interchanging it here, but I think it's appropriate for this discussion. Now, another thing that G-Man brings up is prayer journals. Prayer journals, certainly, I have seen those in my life. I never really kept one. I mean, I did. I grew up in the Mormon Church, which is a Christian organization. Now, G-Man will argue that they're not Christians, and maybe that he'll use that to refute my video because apparently they're not Christians, which is patently false. But anyways, I definitely ran into that sort of thing where we kept journals about our talking experiences with God, about how we necessarily have a relationship with God and how we need to write it down, what prayers were answered, why they were answered the way they were, and whether or not we felt like it was a sufficient answer to our prayer. Now, that's something we did in the Mormon Church a lot. It was called duty to God. It was kind of a Boy Scout thing, kind of a Mormon Church thing. It was a mix of the two, and a lot of our requirements for being a deacon all the way up to a priest, as far as holding the Aaronic priesthood and what that entailed. Part of our requirements for duty to God, for each of those levels, was writing down our interactions with spiritual being that we defined as God, or his Son as well, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. In Mormonism, those things are three separate entities. You have God, you have Jesus, and the Holy Ghost. Now, this is something I've certainly run into, like I've said before, which I probably said too much already. And I did keep a prayer journal of sorts, but it was never it wasn't very detailed. So, I mean, I am kind of brought down to that level of ignorance on this issue to that degree, because I've never kept a prayer journal the way that Gman says that he has friends who's kept prayer journals. Gman says in this video that he himself does not keep a prayer journal. And he says that this can be proven to anybody, that God answers your prayers. And later on in the video, he'll explain what answers can be given and how that applies to being proof of God, necessarily, and being proof that prayer works. So, to emphasize this point, Gman brings up these stories of his. Now, I've had very similar stories, not necessarily in the same fashion Gman has, or even the same situation, actually, but similar outcomes to similar sort of problems. Now, G-Man's stories about prayer, his first one is, I call it the Catholic girl story. Now, he didn't really give it a name or anything like that, and, I don't see why he would. But I give it a name, and the name is the Catholic girl story, because he mentions that he met a girl who, at his work, he worked as a manager or something at a grocery store or retailer or something like that. And this girl was coming into work every day, almost every day, to see him and talk to him. And he was very busy, he said, so it wasn't like he could have a social life. And he segues into the prayer conversation by saying that he prayed and asked God if this girl was someone that God wanted him to be with. Now, I think it's important how G-Man says this, because he says that he prayed to ask it how God would want him to interact with this girl, because it has to be within his will. It has to be within God's will, right? So he prayed and asked God if this girl was someone that could be in his life, in such a way that it was someone who he could be with, or whether or not that should be the case. So G-Man claims that God answered his question in 2 days. Now, nothing that God has to do with this. Like, there's nothing that God has to do with any of this as it goes forward. But G-Man seems to think so, and he seems to recognize there's a dichotomy, or I should say trichotomy, in this idea that prayers are proof of God. He seems to recognize that there is a degree of uncertainty as to whether or not your prayer will be answered in a certain way, because it all depends on God's will, whatever God's will may be. So he continues, and he says that this is the answer to his prayer. The girl walked past him with another man, and then again, walked past him again, holding hands. He says that later on he had confronted her about this, and to see if he was in a relationship, or she was in a relationship with this man. She confirmed that she was in a relationship with this man that she was holding hands with in the mall that he said that he was in. And erroneously, he stops and concludes it at that God answered his prayer, that this woman was not to be in his life in that way. and that it was God's will that this happened, that this woman obviously displayed that she was taken. My question is, would this have happened anyway if Gman had not prayed? And I think we all know the answer to this question, at least us rational ones do. Now, let's move on to the second story. I think the second story is a little bit more interesting because, I mean, it includes it includes kind of like a miracle kind of thing. So, G-Man's second story is about him moving out of his house with his sister. He was living in his sister at this apartment or this house, whatever the domicile may be, and she was moving out. She was going to go, and he had to be able to either get a new apartment or continue the paying bill there. I think that's what he said, and that he was low on cash. He didn't have the money to just simply move out the next day, or to even pay the down payment on another apartment. He didn't have the money, the funds to do that sort of thing. So G-Man says that he left the house and he prayed for the money for an apartment. And this is kind of the funny part. So he starts dumpster diving in a sort of way. So he's looking at a trash can. He's looking at CDs, and there's a CD player in there. He's looking at the CDs to see if any of them were CDs that he would like. And I've got to admit, I've done that. I've done that before too. I mean, honestly, if I see something that's valuable in the trash, I just kind of like I give it a glance. I don't always get it out there, but I give it a glance. So I can relate to you, G-Man, on this issue. So he starts looking through the trash, and he comes across the safe. Now, I don't know how big the safe is. Probably not that big because it was thrown in a trash can. But he runs across it nonetheless. And there's holes in the safe. And he looks through, and he knows there's money in there. And he's not wrong. And he knows this from the start. And he shows it to other people in his family. And they don't necessarily believe him right off the bat because, it's hard to see what's in the safe, right? So that's understandable. But he already had this precondition, this pre-understanding, I should say, that there was money in that safe. So he takes it to his father. Him and his father try to get it open. They can't get it open. So a while later, he's bashing on with a hammer. And next thing you know, he opens the safe. And out falls out $3,000 in cash. And immediately, G-Man goes to say that therefore his prayer was answered. He received the funds to move out of his apartment, or at least to get a new one. So that's his second story regarding the power of prayer and how it proves God exists. And as he continues, he says some other things. He says that prayer should be done within the Lord's will. That you can't just pray for any old goddamn thing you want, because it's not about you. It's about God's plan and what God's plan is for you and for everyone else. And that sometimes things will happen that are part of God's plan that you don't want to happen. That's almost verbatim what he said. Almost verbatim. Quote unquote, he said it's not about you anymore. God allows things to happen you don't want to happen. Okay. So I took some notes on this. And at the end of the video, he says something that I think refutes his argument entirely. I wrote a diagram here. I'm not going to show it because it's kind of pointless, but you have prayer, and then you have three possible answers you can gain from that prayer. You can either have one answer, which is yes. You can have no. And then you can have not now. Now, regardless of what prayer you ask, you can get an answer to your prayer, to any prayer you have whatsoever. It can be about yourself. It could be about something that you really want that, has nothing to do with God's plan. even if you knew it had nothing to do with God's plan, you could still get one of these three answers: yes, no, or not now. Now, the reason that this refutes his argument is because this can be made for any prayer whatsoever. If I prayed for a magical fairy to come to my door, hit me on the head with the, little star wand, and totally wipe my memory. Like, if I prayed for that and it didn't happen, there wouldn't, like, the same thing would not have happened. And the reason I could say this is because any of these three answers, even if they did apply, they wouldn't link in a causality to a prayer. The reason they don't link to a prayer is because the prayer has nothing to do with the reality that we're currently in. The reality that we're currently in has to do with probability. It has to do with what's likely to happen and what's not likely to happen, and the means by which anything that is likely or unlikely happens. Now, Gman has already said in this video, because they're going to claim that, how do you know it's not, someone talking in your head, and, it's a bunch of bullshit. Yeah, he's already addressed that people are going to say that. And people are right to say that, because if you're just going to pray about any old goddamn thing and somehow you get an answer to your prayer, like, if I prayed for a pound of cocaine to land on my doorstep tomorrow and it happened, do you think that's really, evidence for God existence? Because I know how you feel about drugs, man. You don't like drugs. But what if drugs were part of God's plan? And they must be, because my prayer was answered with a yes. And a pound of cocaine landed on my front door. So that would be my argument for prayer. But I know G-Man wouldn't like that argument, because it's against what he thinks is God's plan. God's plan is not to have cocaine land on your front porch. And he can claim that all he wants. But I can use his argument to refute his own. Because at the same time, if I prayed for that and the answer was yes, then what more proof do you need that it's bullshit? Or then again, I can even ask, I can ask for, I don't know, what would I ask for if I prayed? I don't know, I haven't prayed in years because I'm not religious anymore. But, I used to pray for things that were small, too. I used to pray for, snacks from the grocery store, But if I prayed, do you think I would really have the probability of getting those things from the store, like donuts and, whatever candy they had? Do you think I was going to get that because I asked God? Or do you think I got that because my parents heard it and they decided to get me that? The more likely option would be that my parents overheard me praying and they want me to, experience the power of prayer by answering my prayer for me. Now, you can argue that that's playing God, but I would be convinced nonetheless of your argument, G-Man, if that was the case. And the reason is that's so is because it's easy to be fooled with prayer. If you only have three answers that you could possibly get from prayer, yes, no, or not now, which are the only answers you could possibly get to pretty much anything, then there's really no point in continuing having a prayer. And here's another thing, G-Man. God's will. If it isn't within God's will that children starve every day, do you think it's very petty of you to ask for money to move out of an apartment? Because I know that these kids probably pray themselves for food. They probably pray for shelter. They probably pray for, things that we would take for granted in our society. And here you are praying to God about wanting to move out of your apartment and wanting the money to do so. Yet at the same time, the prayers of others who are far more desperate than you are, than any of us are, than I am especially, their prayers aren't answered. But are you going to say that their prayers were answered and that they would just answer no? Well, why would God answer the prayer of a man living in New York wanting cash to move out of his apartment, who obviously doesn't have a problem with starving, over someone who had a total like condition of condition of poverty, where there is no food, there is no water, there is not the means to live, and they just pray for the means to live. Yes, no, or not now. That answer, it can be deadly for them, if not yes, or even if not now, because those things are much more pertinent to people in their own lives than it is with your petty shit. Now, I'm sorry to put it that way, G-Man, but it is really petty shit to think that I'm going to pray for, this girl to see if she likes me, to see if God wants her to like me or wants me to like her, because, God knows what's best, right? That is such a petty thing to pray for. Very petty. To think that you got that answered because you had a prayer. And you would have been like, well, I guess I came to the conclusion that that's not going to happen. Same exact thing could have happened. This is not evidence for God. This is evidence that there is an incredulity that comes with being religious. Just because you don't know what God's will is, whatever God's will is anyways, that you can make an argument that says, oh, yes, no, or not now is always going to be the answer to my prayer. It's very redundant, and it's also it's just a really bad argument, G-Man. I mean, you've had this video for 2 years now, and you've gotten so many dislikes, and you've had so many people argue with you over this subject in other Google Plus Hangouts. You've had people like what's his name, Matt Bell, who have confronted you and tried to have a intervention with you to get you to drop these very bad arguments. Yet you continue to purport them as if they're correct. And I've had discussions with you, G-Man, in your own Hangouts. And when it doesn't go your way, you always want to censor. And that's fine, though. That's fine, because I feel like you treat others how you want to be treated. And obviously, I can see how you want to be treated, because how you treat others, especially when it regards, someone's view on prayer, you treat it as if the other person's is not valid. In the same video that you made, what you declared was that this woman who was responding to your idea of prayer as proof of God's existence, said she was Christian for 10 years. And you doubted whether or not she was even a Christian, because she said none of her prayers were answered. Now, that really bugs me, because as someone who is religious like yourself, shouldn't you take whatever you can get when it comes to spirituality? Because you don't really have a leg to stand on right now. Because everything you've done, at least within the past few years, has everything to do with apologetics. And apologetics is the sign, or is the signal, of a dying breed of ideology, which is religion. It's the death of religion that has spurred your channel, that has created your channel, ultimately. Because you feel the need to defend it to the last straw, even when there's no straws left to defend. Now, I think I'm going to end this pretty soon, but just as a catch-all thing for this video, I just want to say that I don't hate you, G-Man. And it's not that I don't like you, because I kind of do like you. You're pretty entertaining. But you're not doing well for yourself. And even theists like Matt Bell can see this. You're not doing well for yourself when you continue to stick with arguments that have already been refuted millions of times. I refuted it just now. And I probably didn't even have to, because this argument's already been refuted. But I think it's important to let you know, G-Man, that the direction you're going with your channel and with your interactions with atheists on YouTube and the Google Plus community, it's not going to end well for you. You're not going to get the desired result you want. The desired result you want is to expose the lies of the last dispensation, or not the last dispensation, but the last days. You want to expose the lies of the last days. Well, G-Man, people look at you as a liar. People think you're the liar. Other theists think you're a liar. They think your arguments are bad and that you're misleading people into thinking in such a way that is not even conducive to theism. And that bugs me because I like seeing your videos. I do like seeing them. I like how you do keep the comments open and how the ratings are still open. Because that takes guts. That takes guts. With a position like yours, that does take guts to keep your shit open. Because I know plenty of people in the SJW crowd who do not embrace that concept. Of course, you're not an SJW. And I got to give you credit for that. But anyways, it's time to end this broadcast. G-Man, if you want to have a debate sometime, absolutely, I would love to have a debate with you. It would be very interesting to see. At the same time, if there's any arguments you think I've made that are false, please let me know. And I don't know if this goes as a challenge to you, G-Man, but if you would like to have a debate, I am down for it. Of course, I probably have to go to some place where my internet's better, because the last time I was on your podcast, we were talking over each other, but not because I was being a dick and talking over you, or you were being a dick and talking over me. That wasn't really the case. It's because we had a delay, at least on my end. I think it was on my end, and that kind of gave off a vibe of that I was trying to interrupt what you were saying and not let you speak and not listen. And that's not what I want to get across. That's not what I was doing that day. And I don't know. I'm pretty sure you don't remember, but I want to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And that if we do have a debate, it will be much better than our interactions in the past. Anyways, G-Man, this is my refutation to your argument that prayer works and that prayer is proof that God exists. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. CJ the Skeptic here. You guys have a good one.